Alrighty, welcome to the ADHD Canvas 30-day challenge. So, what is the ADHD Canvas? Well, it is a visual ADHD coaching tool, and it allows you to get your ADHD out of your brain so that you can see it visually on the canvas. And once you can do that, you can actually spot the patterns in your own ADHD. So, this is not just generic tips and advice that you are going to get online. You're going to understand your own ADHD, actually spot the patterns of your own ADHD behavior. And then once you've spotted those patterns, you can then start to work on some of those executive function challenges, and you can visually map out how you are going to take action and start managing some of those executive function challenges. Not only that, you can start to build healthy daily habits that are going to fuel your brain, which is going to help you to manage those executive function challenges. And not only that, it allows you to track the tasks and reminders on any device. So what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is those visual tools actually live inside a task management application called ClickUp. So you've got the best of both worlds. You can track tasks and reminders, but you can actually visually map them out on these whiteboards on the canvases inside the one system. So you're not doing it twice. You're not writing it down and planning it out visually on a piece of paper. You're doing that in the tool that's actually going to help you remind you to stay on track. So we've got the action canvas and the overview canvas there. And this is what I mean. If you look in, you can actually turn those tasks that you're using on your sticky notes, those bits of information, you can actually turn those into tasks where you are actually planning out visually. And then that's a different view of all the executive function challenges that you're going to work on. They all get created as you are working on the canvases. And inside each of those challenges, you've then got the guide to how you then begin to manage them. And you've got lots of different coaching tools at your fingertips there as well. And inside ClickUp, you've also got some really cool visual tools that can just help you help you work through that planning. If you can see it, you can understand it. So there's lots of mind map tools, and there's also really useful tool for time blindness, where you can actually drag out tasks and milestones that you've got to do, and you can actually see how long it's going to take you to do those, and then overall how long it's going to take you to finish that challenge or project or whatever it is that you're working through. So it really helps you to actually start, rather than just writing a generic to-do list. It actually puts some dates and times, and you can visually map those out with some of these really cool tools in there. And as I said, it's also on every device. You can use it in the browser, you can use it on a desktop app, and you can use it on your phone. So everything lives inside ClickUp, and it's brilliant. So how does this system work? What is the framework that it works on? Well, it's the UMPAR framework, and I'm going to explain what each stage is. First of all, you understand and uncover. This is basically trying to understand how ADHD works and how your own ADHD works. Then we move on to maintain and move. That is essentially how we fuel our brain to be able to actually put some of these plans into action. And then in order to make a plan, we've got to help visually map out how to plan, but also more importantly, how to prioritize a lot of the work that goes into managing our executive function challenges. But then, of course, we've got to actually start taking action. That can be one of the points at which people with ADHD tend to fall flat. So we're going to learn how to take action, and also, more importantly, how to be accountable to ourselves, but also how to get support in that accountability as well. And finally, reflect and repeat, because We tend not to look back on what went well or what didn't go well, and we can end up repeating the same mistakes over and over again. But what we're going to do is we're going to build in some moments of reflection so that we can actually learn, so that when we go through and move on to the next challenge, we learn a little bit more about ourselves and we can improve. So, in a little bit more detail, then, all those stages of UMPAR, understand and uncover. So we're going to learn, how does the brain work? How does the ADHD brain work? What's the difference between the two? We're going to look at the two systems of the brain. Okay, so if you have read Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, he calls them System 1 and System 2. Or if you've read The Chimp Paradox by Professor Stephen Peters, he calls it the human brain and the chimp brain. But understanding those two elements of our brain is going to be really, really important for understanding our own ADHD, because we'll be able to look through that lens and understand when each one of those systems is in charge. And basically, if we look at how the chimp brain works, it's an instinctual, impulsive, and autopilot mode for our brain, because the human brain requires a lot of fuel. And with ADHD, we've got reduced dopamine receptors. So that means that we've got less fuel, less dopamine to fuel that part of that logical part of our brain. And so we spend most of our time, or a lot more of our time, with the chimp brain in control. And the chimp brain, it's instinctual, so it's fight, flight, or freeze. And if you analyze fight, flight, and freeze, you'll realize that a lot of your executive function challenges are in some way related to those. So understanding which system is in charge when we're having our specific challenges is going to be really important. And so, like I say, we're going to use the ADHD Canvas, the overview canvas, to understand your own ADHD brain, not anybody else's. This is not generic advice that you can get off social media and the internet for somebody. It's going to be, how can you build the system for the way your brain works? And like I say, if we can understand what triggers your own executive functions, whether it be a fuel issue or whether it be our chimp being scared, fearing that something's going to go wrong, then we can know how best to start managing that challenge. So maintain and move. Okay, so this is all about fueling the brain. Okay, so what causes my dopamine to drop? We're going to understand that. We're going to take a look at what habits can refuel the brain. And it's not just dopamine that we need for a healthy brain. There's also oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And those can help support the dopamine production, but also help support us having and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. And we're going to figure out how we can actually build a daily routine that we can stick to. I'm so sure we've all tried to build a daily routine, but it's very hard. And we tend to do everything all in one go, a bit like New Year's resolutions in January. We try and change our life in massive ways. And then as soon as we hit a roadblock, we stop and then we feel like we failed. So we quit. So how do we maintain a routine? Well, we are going to do it slowly. We're going to build one habit at a time so that we can build up to that daily routine in small steps. And what can we do if the routine breaks? Well, I'm going to come into this concept in a bit more detail later on, but I call it the emergency backpack. And it's what we can do for ourselves to reset when we realize that either we've skipped part of our daily routine, or we feel like we failed in some way, or we've figured out that maybe the novelty has worn off. What can we do to get back into it? And we will use this analogy of an emergency backpack later on. So the next step in detail is plan and prioritize. So we're going to be using the action canvas to plan and prioritize how we are going to tackle these executive function challenges. So from the overview board, we will have prioritized which one we should work on first, and then we're going to take that and analyze that on the first action canvas. So we understand the challenge, and we've got a series of different executive function coaching tools that will help us understand that specific challenge in more detail. Then we're going to set ourselves a goal. Okay, what is it that would change our lives in regard to this executive function challenge that we've got? What is our goal for this challenge? And then we're going to plan out what small steps could we take to get there. Okay, break it down into smaller steps, and it seems less of a big mountain to climb. And then we're also going to identify which tasks that we need to do in order to reach each one of those milestones and eventually our goal. And like I say, we're going to figure out how we can prioritize those tasks so that we can do the important ones first. I've got all visual tools, impact and effort scale makes it easy to figure out which one of these tasks I should be doing today, but basically also figuring out what order we might need to do them, and are any of these tasks going to need one task to be done first before you can reach the next stage. And all those are visual tools that you can use, and like I say, all of those live within inside the ClickUp workspace that you'll be working with. So depending on whether you like to do it on the canvas itself or you actually start using the ClickUp tool itself, you're going to be able to begin to plan your action plan with ease. And sticking with the action canvas, we then look at the A of UMPAR, which is action and accountability. Because it's all well and good creating a plan, we're all good at writing to-do lists. We've probably written 4 or 5 different to-do lists in the last couple of days, and we never go back to them. So it's all well and good that we might have actually made this plan, and we might stop right there and say, okay, well, that's my problem solved. But really, part of the action and accountability is looking at where that plan might come unstuck and how are we going to stay accountable. So going back to the lens of looking through those 2 systems of our brain, our strengths and our saboteurs, once we understand those from the overview canvas, we're going to look at this specific challenge and understand what it is that this particular challenge represents for us and where we might hit some barriers. And we're going to identify what those barriers might be, and then we're going to identify what we are going to put in our emergency backpack for when we do. So the analogy I like to use for the emergency backpack is if you have ever gone on a road trip, but if you take a young child on a long drive, a road trip, at some point that child is going to get bored, thirsty, hungry, and it probably will lead to a meltdown. Now, if ever we've been in that situation and a child has had a meltdown, then it can feel awful. It can ruin the journey, could even ruin the day. And what we learn from that is perhaps next time when we go on that road trip, we might want to take with us an emergency backpack, and in that we might put some drink of water, some snacks, and maybe some books or puzzles or games to entertain the child. So really we're trying to be the designer. Whilst we're using our logical part of our brain, we are designing for when our chimp brain is in control, and we're going to figure out what it needs in those moments, and we're going to make accessible to us all those tools in our emergency backpack. And we're going to figure out how we can stay accountable. Who can we recruit on board? Who can we tell that we're doing this challenge and get a bit of moral support and help celebrate some of those wins? And also, what are we going to do to motivate ourselves? Are we going to actually treat ourselves when we hit a particular milestone? So how can we stay accountable and motivated? And also, what are the tools that we're going to need to succeed whilst we go through and start executing on that plan? Because whenever we make a vague plan, or there are parts of it that we don't understand or haven't quite figured out yet, Then when we reach those points, that can be a point at which our chimp gets scared and it shuts down, it freezes, fights, flight, or freezes. So what we're going to do is we're going to identify what tools we're going to need during our challenge, and identify if there are any areas where we need to learn a little bit more, or at some point we are going to need to figure out something else. And so we were going to make a note of that so that when that time comes, we've got less of a step to reach it. Okay. And then the final step of UMPAR is reflect and repeat. Quite often with ADHD, we never look back on, we complete a project and then we move straight on to the next one. And we start the same cycle over and over again. But what we're going to do is we are going to factor in, and we're going to place in our process moments where we can reflect. It could be daily reflection, it could be a weekly reflection, it could be when we hit a different milestone, but we're going to program those in to our challenges. And we're going to ask ourselves what went well, because we rarely celebrate the wins. We tend to only remember what could have gone better. But we need to identify both of those things and then ask ourselves, well, how can I adjust my plan in order to get to where I'm going now that I know what's working and what isn't? And repeating that reflection will allow us to start learning something about ourselves. It helps us to understand about what situations have what triggers, and what particular situation triggers what tools that we use to get ourselves out of those, whether it's we can't do things when we're tired, and what messages we need to give to ourselves in order to calm down the chimp and refuel. Okay, and what we want to try and remember is that this is a system where we keep repeating and optimizing. Basically, where we tend to, where other systems tend to, we tend to drop off and stop. And like I say, when you're trying to do a New Year's resolution, we make it too hard. And then as soon as we hit a wall, we feel like we've failed and we stop. But basically, we're not gonna have that mentality. We are basically gonna ask ourselves, what worked in that experiment, what didn't work, and then how can I use that to make the next experiment better? And so we're improving, we're not failing. Every piece of information is data and insights into understanding ourselves more. So what happens during the 30 days? Well, as soon as you sign up, you will get access to your workspace and all the tools, and you'll be able to get set up in your workspace. And also we're going to schedule in 4 group coaching calls where you can basically, you'll have all the course videos that come at the beginning, and those will be dripped out through the 4 weeks, and you'll also get a chance to jump on the group coaching call live Q&A, where you can ask any questions or run through any bits where you get stuck, and you'll be able to chat in the community as well with all the people that are doing the challenge with you. But let's have a breakdown of each of the weeks. So week 1 is understanding your ADHD brain. So that's where you'll map out your own ADHD brain and have that eureka aha moment. And then week 2, we're going to start looking at how to build a daily habit routine, which is going to refuel the brain. Then we're going to look at how we can start planning and prioritizing and taking action on your biggest ADHD executive function challenge. And then in week 4, we are going to look at that reflection process so that we can repeat this process in cycles and go through all of those executive function challenges that you have outlined in your overview canvas, and begin to build up a repeatable routine for yourself to help you begin to thrive. Okay, so All that is left to do is to go over and sign up to the ADHD Canvas 30-day challenge. It starts on the 1st of June. I can't wait to see you there.